Back then, our thinking was, maybe China will have dozens of retail chains with over 10,000 stores. If you add up our companies, it looked like we were about to hit 100 billion.
Over the past 8 years since we set out, China's retail landscape has already undergone profound and fundamental changes. We believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, these changes will be even bigger and faster, bringing even more opportunities.
If you can make really good choices in categories, combine products well, ensure supply chain fulfillment, and keep updating your sales machines, you can actually achieve great efficiency at scale. In the past, our franchises were connected but not unified. With this new generation of models, the key is to really lock things in, to set clear standards. That way, consumers get a much better experience.
The dividends from residential communities, nurturing potential franchisees, and a rich supply chain, I think these are all external factors. But in my opinion, the most important thing is actually the sharp, innovative store formats brought about by the founders' creativity.
Pinduoduo opened up the lower-tier markets outside the fifth ring. In recent years, our tens of thousands of chain stores have done something similar. We've built another pipeline, bringing these stores to an additional 600 million or even 800 million people, maybe even reaching 1 billion people, right at their doorstep.
I believe consumers' pursuit of a better life is truly limitless.
Untitled Kitchen Capital.
Zhang Xinjiao, Kitchen Capital.
The two of us founded Kitchen Capital together in 2016, and from the very beginning, we wanted to create a fund focused on investing in China's consumer sector. Over the years, maybe not everyone has fully realized this, but we are probably the most active, most committed, and most extensively invested investors in China's offline retail sector during this period. Qin Zhao, why don't you tell everyone about the investments and layouts we've made in the past?
Right, we have two particularly large segments in offline retail. One is centered around communities, where we've invested in the theme of community-based chain stores, aiming for tens of thousands of outlets. And as for shopping centers, we've made investments in large-scale shopping center chains as well. Let me first talk to everyone about our investments related to communities. If we look at a city, there's a very vibrant city in China, Changsha. So, if everyone wakes up early in the morning there. So, when you wake up in Changsha in the morning, you might go to Qiandama at the entrance to buy the fresh vegetables and meat you need for the day. Then, for the office workers heading to work, they might stop by Xinjiang on the way to grab a cup of coffee, some fresh milk, or a sandwich, these kinds of fresh food convenience stores. And then, in the evening, a lot of kids, together with their grandparents, will head over to Mingming Henmang to buy all sorts of their favorite snacks from the dazzling selection. When the weekend comes, everyone wants to treat themselves to a nice meal at home. They'll go to Guoquan, which we invested in, to buy hot pot ingredients and host friends and family at home. All those things people used to buy at the supermarket, fresh produce, ready-to-eat foods, cooked dishes, frozen goods, snacks, are now available right downstairs in our community. You only need to take a few steps to easily get everything you need. This is a huge change we've seen in retail, and actually, there are quite a few interesting things behind it. There are some really interesting social reasons behind this, which we can talk about in more detail a bit later.
Just the small retail shops downstairs in a residential community, our assessment was, maybe China will have dozens of retail chains with thousands of stores. Look at these companies, like Qiandama, 3,000 stores and over 10 billion in revenue. Mingming Henmang has 15,000 stores and more than 5 billion, Guoquan has thousands of stores and billions in revenue. All these companies, I estimate, they're about to hit 100 billion, but if we look back 5 years ago, all of them combined were just barely making 10 billion in business. So this is really a business model that has developed extremely quickly in recent years. The main thing, I think, is that focusing on community stores has created a huge opportunity for everyone. And another thing is, in shopping malls, we've always wanted to invest in a theme called thousand-store chains. Actually, not long ago, I also went to Nanjing. There's a shopping mall in Jiangbei district, and honestly, it seems like almost all the brands we've invested in are there. Right at the entrance on the first floor, there's an eye-catching M-stand coffee where lots of young people gather. Then, if you turn the corner, there's Shueji roasted snacks, and plenty of other tasty and healthy snacks. Buy some chestnuts, sunflower seeds, and all those things kids love to eat. When you walk to the first floor, you'll find those familiar fast food spots, Majiyu beef noodles, Super Bowl light salad, and then if you go up to the higher floors, for example on weekends, you might bring the kids along. Or maybe the whole family goes together to take a family portrait at Haima's studio. And next to that, there are shops that moms love to browse. Lin Qingxian, which has over 500 chain stores, and also You Want Your Bath, which now has more than 1,000 locations in shopping centers. You can just imagine thinking, wow, our family. Maybe we're not ready to change houses just yet, but what about switching up the furniture to make home feel better? So, when you add up all these different types of businesses in our shopping centers, there are probably over 4,000 stores in total. We're also generating several billion in sales. Just now you mentioned these community stores, and I was thinking, if we have 40,000 stores and 8 or 9 billion in sales revenue, actually, each time someone shops at a community store, they might only spend about 20 to 30 yuan, which means that in a year, we could really be serving 4 to 5 billion customer visits. So, why do you think this has happened in the past? Why is the number so high? We already know that in recent years, e-commerce has been so powerful, so why are there still so many offline stores like community shops and shopping centers springing up like mushrooms after the rain and growing so rapidly?
Right. That's a great question. Back in 2016, we actually noticed one of the biggest changes in society. China had built a huge number of residential communities, tens of thousands of new neighborhoods, and in fact, hundreds of millions of families gradually moved into these communities. When people move into these communities, they need supporting facilities for daily life. These neighborhoods might not have a nearby wet market or big supermarket. However, many ground floor commercial spaces exist, and because our neighborhoods are densely populated, these shops serve as important amenities. They can be opened up, one after another, each with an annual sales revenue of 3 to 5 million, operating as specialized businesses. Then, with the addition of some of our internet technologies, how does this affect franchise management? It's also becoming easier and easier. So just like mushrooms after the rain, a large number of small community-centered stores has sprung up one after another.
So what about those businesses in shopping malls?
Right. As for shopping malls, actually, the reason behind them is that we built a lot of new residential communities, and they form clusters. These clusters need places for people to relax and spend leisure time with their families on weekends. So shopping malls, as part of a city's infrastructure, have also been built in large numbers by commercial developers all over China. At the same time, ordinary people also need a richer lifestyle. This way, whether it's leisure restaurants or recreational services, there's something for everyone: clothing, accessories, and even some sports venues. Within these, we are constantly exploring and discovering business models that are suitable to become nationwide chains, the kind that can last for 1,000 years.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, these are some of the macro-level changes happening in China. Quietly, these changes are improving our lives, right? Over the past 20 years, the biggest thing in China has been urbanization. In many of the new first-tier, second-tier, and third-tier cities, today our real estate development has brought everyone together as a whole. People have moved into new districts. Take Longfor as an example. They built great houses, and at the same time, the government provided supporting facilities like opening up well-designed shopping malls. At this point, maybe we've shifted from those old pedestrian streets, Shopping streets, nowadays, everyone has moved into these big box stores. And right now, our online platforms are so advanced. JD.com, Tmall, Pinduoduo, Douyin, they bring us a huge variety of products, and sometimes they even deliver them right to our doorstep. So now, I can take my family and kids to the shopping center to have a meal and stroll around. Yes, buying things is actually a form of consumption, and it's also a transformation in our lifestyle. So we can really see, wow, it truly is. The reconstruction of our infrastructure and the improvement of online platforms have actually promoted the upgrading of offline urban infrastructure, leading to the evolution of certain business models. If you were to look ahead to the next 10 or 20 years, how do you think the changes and opportunities in China's retail sector will unfold?
Yes, because over the past 8 years since we started out, China's retail industry has already been undergoing profound and fundamental changes. These changes have been happening for the past 10 years, and we believe that in the next 10 to 20 years, these changes will be even greater and faster, bringing even more opportunities. What has impressed us most over the past 10 years is that retail is always about high-efficiency formats replacing low-efficiency ones. We've invested in a number of these high-efficiency formats within community chain stores. Yeah, whether it's brands like Mingming Henmang or Qiandama, we've actually also seized a batch of higher efficiency, more value-driven lifestyle formats in shopping malls. And now, today, these new main players are stepping onto the stage. They've had a huge impact, and they're also forcing those existing, traditional formats to undergo a lot of changes. We could also see that today, many people are carrying out reforms like those at Pangdonglai, and many are trying out different models and adjustments. Actually, at its core, I think it's about the accumulated stock from the past. In such a huge market, everyone is thinking, how can I become more efficient? So today, whether it's innovation in our offline experiential models, product innovation, or changes in the supply chain, it's all part of this. And also, online, there's the current hot topic of instant retail, from food delivery to goods, which is a huge shift. All of these are actually becoming useful tools that can help those offline businesses who know how to make good use of these tools and resources. Chain stores are also bringing about their own kind of evolution and iteration.
In other words, what we've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years might have just been an appetizer, because these changes may be what actually give rise to a whole new wave. New business models, new inventors, and explorers of these models. I personally feel that as retail continues to develop, it's become a driving force in today's economy. When the retail landscape changes, whether it's brands, today's distributors and service providers, or even the entire factories and brands behind them, all of them are affected. The entire supply chain is actually going to undergo significant changes. But if I look ahead, I think in the next 10 or 20 years, there may be even more opportunities waiting for us.
Yes, let me help everyone do some quick math. For example, retail, we're talking about a market of 50 trillion in scale. In the past, everyone talked about growth, but today, I believe everyone is definitely talking about improving efficiency within the existing market. So, if we can improve efficiency by just 1%, well, for a 50 trillion market, that's 500 billion.
500 billion.
It's still a considerable amount, and it's definitely worth, as investors and outstanding entrepreneurs, working together to uncover opportunities.
Alright, we just mentioned earlier that what we've spent the most time on in the past is called the theme of community chain stores with tens of thousands of locations. Just now, if we add up these few companies of ours, we might be close to 100 billion already. Why don't we talk about how we've explored this path over the past few years, especially how we got here? From the very beginning, we even started online before getting to this point. How did we find this direction?
Yeah, I think we really have to thank our time at JD.com. That experience taught us a very fundamental understanding of retail. On one hand, it taught us about cost, efficiency, and user experience. This is the essence of retail. At the same time, through this process, we discovered we were strong in high-ticket, low-frequency products. We captured a lot of market share from e-commerce in those areas. But for low-ticket, high-frequency categories like fresh produce and snacks, it's a different story. E-commerce isn't all-powerful either. For this realization, The entire e-commerce industry has probably paid a huge price, maybe hundreds of billions in tuition fees. I myself have paid thousands in tuition fees. We were participants in this process, and it made us realize, back in 2016, that for high-frequency, low-margin products, especially food, we believe there were huge opportunities offline. So we started looking for clues, asking ourselves, where are the biggest offline goods? At that time, it seemed clear that, on one hand, there are scalable supermarkets, and on the other, there are very fragmented mom-and-pop stores and wet markets. So we asked ourselves, whose new business model could outcompete them? We were really curious about this, so we started to observe.
Just now in the discussion, you also mentioned our background at JD.com, which really gave us a pretty unique perspective. Back then, we were all in JD's strategic investment department, so of course, our focus was on JD. When Alibaba was experiencing strong growth, we really witnessed the rich product selection and better delivery services that e-commerce provided, as well as improvements in some basic infrastructure. It suddenly changed everyone's consumer behavior. Jack Ma also put forward the concept of new retail. People started to ask, hey, now that our online business is so developed, how can we empower or even transform offline formats? So at that time, you saw Alibaba spending money to acquire RT Mart and also starting to support and explore Hema Fresh. JD.com, we were in it together, right? We made a strategic investment in Yonghui. I remember, this was a big trend of connecting online to offline. We believed online advantages transform offline business formats. But looking back today, you can see that the efforts we made on online platforms 10 years ago actually haven't been validated. In fact, just in the past year or two, JD sold its shares in Yonghui and Alibaba sold RT Mart. Right? Starting over, we might realize that this path doesn't work. Actually, I think by now we've basically seen this matter settled. Maybe in the area of front warehouses, in the end, there are companies like Mary Yuxian that stand out. Had to withdraw from the market halfway, maybe there are companies like Dingdong and Pupu, which are probably at the tens of billions level. In the past couple of days, after witnessing the intense community group buying wars, even the most important player, Meituan, might have to make major adjustments to this business. Shifting direction, actually, what do you feel about all this? Everyone, from this perspective, people online say, I really want to use my own methods to solve this phenomenon, but why does it seem like this path just doesn't work?
As for this matter, actually during the process, this is also something we've been constantly thinking about. It's hard for us to say that we had it all figured out from the start, but we've been continuously asking ourselves, is the online solution really better, or is the offline solution better? During the process, we actually started by looking at this from an online perspective. The idea online is that by investing heavily, we can change user behavior, and in the long run, let our outstanding performance prove our economic model, so we can earn a relatively reasonable profit. Let me take community group buying as an example. Actually, throughout the process, we've been observing whether this kind of high-intensity investment can really change user behavior and whether users can be retained in the long run. We kept asking ourselves this question, and we were quite conflicted during the process, because at one point we saw that it was possible to break even. I believe that's also why so much money was poured into it, because everyone saw hope. During this process of repeated reflection, there was actually one thing that became the core reason why we ultimately didn't enter this track. The logic is that all of our current online solutions are fundamentally online focused, with offline as a supplement. We believe that, especially for things like community group buying that rely on small neighborhood stores, in the long run, these mom-and-pop shops might end up being replaced by the community businesses we've invested in. They'll be replaced by large-scale chain stores. So at that point, how can community group buying still rely on these small shops? That's why, based on this belief, we think it's not about online leading and then moving into offline. On the contrary, it should be these offline companies that become more efficient. And then, They can also make use of all the advantageous online tools available today. I can also do delivery to the store. I can do it myself. I can do it too. This O2O delivery, it's actually happening right now. So we really feel quite emotional about it. After nearly 8 years, we've actually gone through a whole cycle, starting from using online thinking to transform offline businesses. And now, it's turned into a surge of highly efficient offline business models. Today, we're once again embracing internet tools to improve our own efficiency.
Indeed, I think back in 2016, at that crossroads, we actually made a very clear choice. It was precisely because we had seen earlier, on online platforms like JD.com, what online was better suited for. Just like you said, online is really good for leveraging its variety. For these mid to high price, medium to low frequency products. But especially when it comes to food, which is so closely tied to people's daily lives and the national economy and people's livelihood. For the 3 meals a day and those high-frequency but low-priced products that I buy regularly, we realized at the time that online might not be the optimal choice. Channel-wise, because even though online today might offer you thousands upon thousands of options, maybe the one thing I love to eat is just that one kind, or maybe I just choose, say, I like Sam's Club. I might prefer those specific products from Pangdonglai, but honestly, they don't really bring me any extra meaning. Also, for example, even though things might be cheaper, if you go offline today, there could be some differentiated products, and nowadays there are actually a lot of convenience stores around here. From a cost perspective, the convenience-oriented community business model isn't more expensive than online, because I don't have to spend extra bucks to deliver to your doorstep. Getting users to come here is actually more impressive. I've discussed this with many in the industry. Some people say that even though you have scale, by saving on delivery for each user here, just not having to deliver upstairs, you might save several yuan each time. Yeah, and when each shopping trip is only about 20 or 30 yuan, saving 3 yuan on logistics fees can make a difference. Actually, this is a source of a lot of value. But more importantly, I think there are still some things about offline experiences that online simply can't replace. Like, when we walk into a store, we can explore and discover things for ourselves. I can especially imagine this now. At Mingming Henmang, the store is huge, with over 1,500 products. I feel like a mouse in a rice jar. Unlike online shopping where I know what to search for, like a specific snack, Kiakia sunflower seeds, or nuts, here, as I walk through, I keep thinking, wow, I haven't tried this or that, and I can sample a little bit of everything. Online, I might have to spend over 50 or even 70 yuan, and that's when my shopping behavior matches the typical online order value, so they offer me free shipping, right? But today, at Mingming Henmang, with just 25 yuan, I might be able to buy 6 or 8 different things. If I had to do this through our old e-commerce warehouse setup, then this would be really complicated. But here, the user is making their own choices on the spot, and you don't even need to give them coupons or anything. It's all up to them. They pick what they want, they pack it themselves, and happily take it home. And what's even more important is that if it's right downstairs in my own community, I'll come 2 or 3 times a week. In these scenarios, offline businesses actually have a huge advantage over online ones. Whether it's in terms of cost efficiency or user experience, the advantage is overwhelming. Especially in recent years, when we talk about high-tier and low-tier cities in China. In fact, this is even more true as we go into the lower-tier cities. The advantages of offline businesses are becoming more and more apparent.
On this point, I'd like to add 2 more things. First, besides helping users save money, we also need to help them save time. Sometimes, just imagine, when people walk into a place like Qiandama or something similar. They're also very busy. There are hundreds or even thousands of SKUs in the store, but users might only spend 30 seconds to 3 minutes inside. They can quickly browse through everything and decide what they actually want to buy. Now, just imagine if you were scrolling through screens online, one screen after another. If you had to look through hundreds of products, it would take you a really long time. And the second point is, regarding the issue of calculating costs, just talking about e-commerce fulfillment alone, warehousing and delivery, even the cheaper orders cost about 4 or 5 yuan each, and the more expensive ones can be over 10 yuan per order. So for us today, when the average order value is generally below 30 yuan, like for these food items priced at 20 or 30 yuan, what can we achieve offline? Offline, we can keep the fulfillment cost to just 2 to 3 yuan per order, and that actually covers not only warehousing and delivery, but also the store's foot traffic. So it's an extremely efficient and low-cost solution.
So from this perspective, looking back at that moment when we had to choose which direction to go, we still feel very fortunate about the decision we made. Yeah, we got involved in what you could say was entering a brand new track ahead of the market, and we caught that wave at the time, the rise and challenges of community chain stores. In recent years, actually, everyone has gradually started to notice this, whether in the market or elsewhere. People are starting to recognize that, in China, so many chain brands with thousands or even tens of thousands of stores have quietly emerged. And if you add milk tea and other beverages into the mix, the number might have suddenly shot up to over 100,000 locations. All kinds of chain stores. Maybe this has already happened quietly, without much notice. But for many, there still isn't a particularly clear perspective. So today, we'd like to share and talk about our own journey in this area. Before we dive into the topic of 10,000 store community chains, it actually all started with our very first project. So, Qiandama, would you say that we really had it all figured out and then found it? Or was it more like Qiandama just landed in our lap in the end? Why don't you talk a bit about how we discovered and thought about Qiandama back then? What do you think was the most unique thing about Qiandama at that time?
Qiandama doesn't sell overnight meat. That's really a phrase that's stuck in people's minds. Even the elderly and kids can recite it. And indeed, their innovation of clearing out all products daily was a real breakthrough. Yeah, it was really clever. Back then, if you wanted something fresh, you come in the morning. If you wanted something cheap, you come in the evening. They segmented their customer base, and what used to be a pain point in the industry, product loss, actually became a marketing asset. Secondly, the daily clearance also made franchising much simpler. For franchisees, management became easier, and there were far fewer conflicts of interest, like trying to pass off lower quality goods as better ones. The difficulty and risk of supervision also dropped significantly. And I also think it comes down to the boss, the founder's insight into the fresh produce business. Especially in southern China, people have a really strong preference for freshness. He really honed in on this point sharply. That's why his stores, at that particular time, truly stood out to us. They were completely different from any other solutions we'd seen, and incredibly effective.
I also remember back then, when we first started thinking about what to invest in, a friend mentioned, "Hey, ever since a Qiandama store opened downstairs from my mom's place in Shenzhen, she's never gone to the wet market or the supermarket to buy groceries again." Then I remember we immediately said, "Let's fly to Shenzhen to check it out." I remember we arrived in the afternoon and went to see the store, and by 7 in the evening, that was actually when Qiandama really showed its unique characteristics. That no overnight meat policy really came into play. I remember at the store, in a prominent spot, a sign said starting from 7, we discount, every half hour, another 10% off. By around 9:30 or so. They said everyone could just take it for free, but actually, that day we walked around a lot of stores in Shenzhen. Maybe around 7 or 8 o'clock, the stores were packed with people. The aunties and uncles probably skipped their square dancing and were all there putting some of today's goods into their baskets. Then, probably by about 8 or 8:30, they'd check out and happily head home. It was really around 9 o'clock when the entire shelf was completely empty. Actually, everyone in the fresh produce business knows that back then, fresh food was a basic necessity and a huge market, but it's tough to do fresh produce. The biggest challenge is the losses from spoilage. Maybe the money you make in a day is lost to spoilage if you don't sell everything that day. So at that moment, I realized that the founder of Qiandama might have come up with a really brilliant innovation. Because he said, by not selling overnight meat and letting everyone sell out with discounts, I can solve this problem. At this point, ordinary people are getting real benefits, but more importantly, it helps retailers deal with their spoilage, and everyone is happy about it. People also trust that your products are fresh, so they keep coming back. The biggest advantage, as I remember, was that there were maybe 1,500 to 2,000 households in the community. Each store might have about 500 people coming in to make purchases every day, and that's even before the discounts start at 7 o'clock. In other words, nowadays, many families in the whole community rely on Qiandama to meet their needs. They probably get 2 meals a day from us, and each family might come 2 or 3 times a week. So now, a single store can have sales of over 10,000 yuan a day. Then, after we standardized our operations, we expanded pretty quickly through franchising, which was a solid investment for us. Back then, there were maybe only 200 stores in Guangzhou, but after just a few years of investment, about 3 years, we were able to open 1,500 to 2,000 stores in the Greater Bay Area. So with that kind of density, we could achieve sales in the tens of billions. Actually, what Qiandama taught us most was that if offline retail can make a really good choice of category, the combination of products, public chain fulfillment, and then add in the upgrade of vending machines, you can actually achieve a very high level of efficiency as well. I remember we compared it at the time, maybe with companies like Miss Fresh or other tech-driven retailers. For front-end warehouses, to reach sales in the tens of billions, they might need to raise several billion in funding, and even then, a lot of that money ends up being used as subsidies to attract users to come back frequently. But for Qiandama to achieve sales in the tens of billions, maybe altogether, they only ever raised 200 or 300 million, maybe 300 or 400 million in cash. So from this perspective, it really made us realize something. Actually, there are a lot of highly efficient combinations among offline stores in China, especially these kinds of stores that focus on a single product category to the extreme. There are huge opportunities here. So, later on, how did we go about discovering those other categories and business formats along this path? Can you talk about that? Yes.
I was really lucky with my first 2 projects. They actually taught me quite a lot. We realized that, under Qiandama site selection logic, you could also ask, could other types of businesses work here? Since there are already 500 people, 500 households, does that mean besides buying fresh produce, people could buy other things? And who are Qiandama's competitors? Most important are supermarkets. They actually took away the fresh produce customers from the supermarkets. So does that mean we could take away other types of customers from the supermarkets too? What else do supermarkets have? They have frozen foods, snacks, and also some ready-to-eat foods that can be eaten immediately. So we followed this line of thinking and looked across the entire market to see what other small business formats are working on the categories we were interested in. That's when we found Xinjiaoyi as our second example. So in this, they've really nailed the timed and real-life scenarios. You can go into a convenience store and buy fresh milk for the day, freshly made buns, chicken legs in Shenzhen, rice balls, or even sandwiches. In fact, they've solved a lot of problems with this approach. This kind of dining demand. Now, if we look at new first-tier cities and provincial capitals, we find that cities like Changsha, with so many young people and such vibrant consumption, have a very dynamic business life. It's really diverse and perfectly suited for 24-hour convenience stores. So after looking at convenience stores in cities all over China, at that time, we probably checked out 7 or 8 Chinese convenience store brands. We felt that Xinjiaoyi had the potential to become the largest new generation convenience store chain in China. That was back in 2018. We hit it off right away, felt like old friends at first sight, and very quickly became shareholders of Xinjiaoyi.
As I mentioned earlier, when we started from Qiandama and looked at these kinds of stores in China, there was actually a pretty significant logic behind it. Originally, these business formats might have existed in 2 ways. One is in supermarkets in China, and the other, which is actually even bigger, is in the traditional wet markets. In supermarkets, it's usually just a section dedicated to a certain category. And then, maybe, In the wet markets, it's made up of many individual stalls. What we've done with these chains in China is basically to take certain elements from these two original business formats and separate them out. Yeah, it's become specialized, right? In today's terms, it's about reselecting the entire range of products, reorganizing the categories, and then fitting them into a 60 or 80 square meter storefront in our community. After creating a basic model, it was then expanded into the fruit section of nationwide chain supermarkets. Nowadays, for example, in the fresh produce section of Guoquan, you'll find fresh food formats like Qiandama and others. Back then, there might also have been some marinated food sections where we'd see familiar brands like Joy, Xian, and Baiweiji. We all love hot pot and barbecue, so Guoquan took this category and specifically turned it into a chain specializing in hot pot and barbecue ingredients with 400 or 500 SKUs, creating a dedicated mini supermarket just for hot pot. And then, speaking of snacks, they basically took the entire snack section, and turned it into a nationwide chain. So what we can see is that nowadays, the restaurants we go to are basically all specialty stores by category. At this point, you might start to feel that running a supermarket, after transforming it into a highly specialized chain, what specific kinds of significant adjustments does this particular business model truly need to go through today in order to quickly and effectively become a truly scalable and rapidly growing business?
Supermarkets in China. Their boom started in the 1990s and, after the year 2000, entered a period of rapid development. What stands out most from that time is that everyone used fresh produce to attract customers, and then relied on selling medium and low-frequency goods to actually make a profit. So, supermarkets operate by juggling a larger mix of product categories. But when you switch to a small store format, you become a specialist in one or two categories. At that point, it's hard to say, hey, I have one category that makes money and another that just brings in customers, but doesn't make money. That kind of model probably won't work anymore. So what does that mean? It means that instead of working with a broad mix of categories, now I have to use the product mix within a single category as my driving force. And here, I really need to find the sharpest, most competitive edge I have. Whether it's a major product, a best-selling item, or my signature product, it's extremely important. For example, take Qiandama as an example. Their slogan is Qiandama doesn't sell overnight meat, even though they also sell vegetables and fruit. But for consumers, Dama's meat is the freshest, the best, and the most competitive. As for Guoquan, its founder, Mr. Yang, used to run a hot pot chain as well, so he has a deep understanding of hot pot products and personally gets involved. He developed the soup bases himself, like the 7 tomatoes base, which was actually very advanced in China at the time. This kind of tomato broth, as well as some of the ingredients from our country, like their shrimp paste, which they produced in collaboration with factories, were all part of it. All of these would become products that stick in consumers' minds, things they'd recommend to their friends. That includes things like the newly added coffee, which is really popular and highly competitive. All the various foods here are like that, so when you come back to it, when it comes to being a category killer store, how do you make your signature products both high quality and affordable? Because making things both good and cheap isn't just about lowering prices, it's about rebuilding your supply chain around these products. Coming up with a new solution for the supply chain, I think this is a huge challenge for everyone, but also a great opportunity and breakthrough.
What breakthroughs do you feel people have made in supply chains?
Let's make a comparison. The supermarket supply chain is actually a brand-driven supply chain system. It's the brands that use their own distribution and distributors to get their products onto the supermarket shelves, while the supermarket, overall, is really selling shelf space. Then, when everyone becomes a category killer store today, it turns into a situation where the retailer wants to focus on single products. Usually, people will say, I want to have absolute pricing power. I want to cover the entire market. I want to shorten the supply chain and work directly with upstream partners. Because of this, my overall turnover efficiency becomes extremely high. From my warehouse to my store, the fastest we can do is same-day delivery within 24 hours. Well, if it's a bit slower, it's just 15 days, which is still a significant improvement compared to supermarkets that take 30 days or even longer. There's another very important point. Because I'm not operating on a rent collecting model, I don't have those kinds of channel fees, entry fees, or barcode fees. Instead, I just purchase at a bare price, making the financial and sales relationship simple. So, because things are simplified, they're more transparent, and as a result, efficiency becomes higher.
Yeah, we've actually summed this up before. If you want to turn into a community-based chain with 10,000 stores, sometimes it comes down to three things. First, you need to assemble a really great selection of products. Second, you have to create a very sharp business model. And finally, you need to significantly shorten the supply chain and improve efficiency. The third point is that you have to build a highly efficient franchisee recruitment and support system to help franchisees grow. In the past, we saw that most supermarkets operated as regional networks because they needed to manage everything directly. But with today's franchise chain mechanism, can you talk about how these companies, once they found a great selection of products and built a supply chain, can actually grow from just a few stores to several thousand or even tens of thousands of stores within a few years, reaching tens of billions in sales? How does this franchise chain model really work?
There was a time when whenever people mentioned franchising, everyone would immediately think it meant the quality wasn't that good.
Or it was just a cash grab?
Actually, we can first talk about why they weren't good. I think the reason is that, in the past, franchise models really lacked proper management from the chain brand over the stores. Even the supply of goods was out of control. Everyone could just source their own products. As for store displays, there was nothing I could do. Maybe on opening day, everything followed the brand standards. But after that, there was no way to keep things consistent. Everyone would just get worse and worse. And what about service standards? And pricing, actually, even promotions. It was really hard to get involved in any of that. Back in that era, when everything was so scattered and disconnected, there were probably these kinds of loose chains in China too, with hundreds of thousands of stores. Their efficiency was really low, daily output just 1,000 or 2 or 3,000. I remember thinking, weren't the aunties super busy before? This new generation of chains, represented by Xi and Guoquan, they can actually manage things. When they started out, they had control. They could require that all products be sourced from them. Store displays were standardized, pricing was consistent, promotions and even display standards were uniform, and service standards were the same everywhere. The reason they could achieve this, I think, still comes down to regarding the first generation of business models, they made some design changes so that things became simple and executable. Franchisees could follow their standards. Secondly, I think they were innovative in their business approach. If you follow this approach, the results are really good. My set prices are simply better than the ones you'd set yourself. Sourcing from me is just better than sourcing from the open market. So what's the deeper reason behind this? I think that in China, whether it's our internet technology, the level of our supply chains, or the expertise of so many professionals in the industry, all of this makes it possible for us to achieve this. Let me give a small example. Whenever you walk into any Mingming Henmang store, you'll notice how beautifully and neatly everything is displayed. You might wonder, how is it possible for a franchise store to look like this? So how does Henmang achieve this? I think it's actually quite innovative. They work together with IT suppliers to develop something new. They use surveillance cameras to remotely check whether the store displays are up to standard. Through a scoring system and a set of rewards, franchisees are encouraged to meet the company's display standards. I think this represents the best display standards and practices in China, and it really shows the power of technology and management. With this kind of system in place, I believe we can truly maintain control, and that's why the quality of our franchises today is so high. Secondly, I think the reason we're able to open so many stores so quickly today is largely because China has produced a group of people who have made opening franchise stores their own career. You could call them business people. But in fact, they're also the largest group of entrepreneurs we have. Some of them start with 1 or 2 stores, and those who are especially talented and successful might go on to open 10, 20, or even 30 to 50 stores. Professionally, we call them super franchisees. These people are incredibly hardworking. Sometimes they travel 10,000 kilometers in a month, going everywhere to scout locations. They've injected a tremendous amount of energy into China's offline market.
Just like you said, in the past, our previous generation of franchisees, it was connected but not truly unified. It was basically just wholesaling a storefront sign. They wanted to use a single name to link all these mom and pop shops together, but the biggest feature was that they were still running things their own way. Their daily income might just be a few thousand yuan. Mainly, it was just about making enough to cover the staff's wages, and everyone felt that was good enough. But with this new generation of franchise models, the key is to lock things in, to set standards. We use technology-driven product standards and service standards. When everyone can reach that level, consumers today actually get to enjoy a better experience, and naturally, that's achieved right here. Higher spending leads to better store efficiency, and better store efficiency, in turn, brings us even more benefits. Franchisees are willing to invest more. So, we really have seen that many franchise chains have actually turned into something like a refueling station, becoming a mainstream profession. If I want to open a small shop today, it might be just like opening a Qiandama store. When things get really busy, at this point I can invest 200,000 or 300,000 yuan. Maybe add a bit more money, and I can secure the rent and get a place for the shop, do the renovations and all that, and then invest a bit more to stock up on goods. For each store, that's probably about it. Yeah, with 2 or 3 people, you can manage it. At this stage, management isn't that much of a hassle, and the management costs aren't that high either. Each store runs really efficiently. So later on, what we actually saw was this group of franchisees actually joined in during the process, made money, and kept reinvesting to open new stores. They basically turned themselves into small companies. I remember at that time, there were 10,000 stores under the brand. At first, you might have needed 3,000 or 4,000 franchisees, but now, even with 10,000 stores, you might only need 1,000 or 2,000 franchisees. So today, as you mentioned, how do franchisees actually do the math? How do they decide where to invest? With so many options out there, like Qiandama, Guoquan, and so on, why would someone consider Mixue a Bingcheng? That's the question. How do they go about choosing a business, and what kind of support and returns do they expect from these people?
So I think the first thing everyone definitely thinks about is, when can I earn back my initial investment? And the second thing to consider is the scale of the investment. Because for many people, scraping together 300,000 yuan today is one level of franchising, but coming up with 1 million is a whole different level. So, depending on their financial strength, the types of businesses they can join are also different. And third, I think people still look at how difficult it is to run the business, the operational difficulty, and how hard the work is. For example, in terms of how tough the work is, something like Barbie Mantou is probably the hardest. You might have to get up at 3, 4, or even 5 in the morning. Starting from flour and making everything from scratch. That's extremely hard work. Operationally, for products with high spoilage rates, like fresh milk, you must estimate demand accurately. If estimates are off, you'll have much waste. So franchisees will think, with this difficulty, I might not have that kind of ability. So for brand owners, or for chain brands, their goal is to make difficult things simple. You'll also notice that different franchisees of various chain brands, because of their differing requirements and expectations for stability, approach things differently. Because their requirements for the difficulty of joining, as well as their own financial strength, are different, what actually emerges is a situation where everyone gets what they need.
So actually, these rapidly developing chains have provided everyone with a choice of entrepreneurial platforms over the past years. I remember that in 2020, Guoquan had 1,000 stores, and at that time, during the pandemic, there were several occasions when there was a huge demand for frozen foods. At that time, many franchisees could recoup their investment in just a few months, sometimes even less. The results came very quickly. In just 2 years, we saw Guoquan grow to 10,000 chain stores, and it was extremely busy. When starting a business, those initial stores, many of them were able to break even in about a year. At that time, I remember their franchisees were selected maybe 1 out of 100 people, and you had to explain why you were willing to do this, right? And you couldn't just say, I'm only investing money. I want so-and-so to work for me. It had to be people who were willing to invest their own money and also be present in the store themselves every day. Only people like this would be chosen to open a franchise store. So today, once we've put together this kind of product lineup that consumers can trust, and then built a supply chain behind it, the most important thing is if your telecom can provide this. If you can provide an expectation of breaking even within 12 to 18 months, then actually a huge amount of franchisee resources in society today will come rushing to you.
Yes, very busy has become one of the most common phrases for everyone in recent years. It's a topic that's easy to bring up and gets asked repeatedly. Is this driven by your capital? Are they burning money to grow? Is it unsustainable? Actually, with the release of Mingming Henmang's prospectus today, this question has been addressed. I believe many people have seen that, and at least one conclusion can be drawn. In the past, it wasn't about burning money in an unsustainable way, but rather about rapid growth under reasonable profit margins. It's actually quite healthy. So why was there such a rapid pace that made everyone question it in the past? First of all, I think it's related to everything we've just talked about. There are definitely a lot of factors at play today. There are dividends, like the dividends from so many communities we've talked about earlier, the cultivation of so many potential franchisees, and the abundance of supply chains and factories, this kind of richness. I think all of these are external factors, but the most important thing, actually, is still the sharp competitiveness of the stores brought about by the founders' innovation, which creates a strong appeal to consumers. Only then can everyone's ability to make money attract more franchisees who are willing to join in this kind of growth. Specifically, we still have to look at Changsha, which is a truly remarkable hotbed for retail in China. A lot of outstanding new generation retail companies have emerged from Changsha. The possible reason is that Changsha is one of the most fiercely competitive places, with a large population of young people, a highly developed commercial sector, a strong entrepreneurial spirit, and a vibrant atmosphere for chain business startups and franchisees. So, the temporary retail format itself isn't actually a new business model. Even before Yan Zhou, the founder of Lincher Haiba, started the company, there were already plenty of such stores in Changsha, and they definitely existed. But, as we just mentioned, they had the characteristics of the previous generation of chain stores or mom-and-pop shops. The displays were poor, prices were chaotic, and the quality of goods was all over the place. That's what I think. Today, Yanzhou has really redefined the temporary discount store format. The most obvious thing is that the displays are done beautifully. Secondly, when it comes to product selection, they truly stand in the customer's shoes. They pick out the most cost-effective and best value-for-money products for customers from such a rich supply, using a very effective logic for product selection. And what's even more impressive, I think, is their pricing. It really stands out. They set the price at about 70% or even 60% of the mainstream market price, such a price point. And how do they achieve this price? It's all thanks to their supply chain management solution, right? They use cash to directly approach the manufacturers and the most competitive distributors. They go and buy this batch of goods. At the same time, I think there's another really interesting point here, which is that they've actually broadened the boundaries of what is considered convenience today, because this is from the user's perspective. For example, nowadays, people drink dairy products and buy baked bread. Does that count as a traditional snack? Strictly speaking, it actually doesn't. But for consumers, these are all things that meet their needs when they're a little hungry, want a little treat, need breakfast, or want something for afternoon tea. So, they've effectively included a broader range of traditional leisure foods, making this platform more comprehensive. It can better meet the needs of consumers. So, these kinds of innovations made their store really stand out when we first saw it, and it quickly took off in Changsha. Of course, I think the development that followed was because this sharp and refined business model was forged in such a fiercely competitive environment in Changsha, when it was introduced to places outside of Changsha, it actually unleashed a potential that far exceeded our expectations. This kind of competitiveness brought about a surge in franchise applications. I remember at the time, it felt like applying for a franchise was almost like taking a college entrance exam. The acceptance rate was really low, maybe only 1 out of 50 applicants would get in. So this kind of momentum made it expand at a speed no one had ever seen before, which also brought about a lot of skepticism.
When we first went to see Lincher, who was very busy at the time, I think the main issue we actually had to address was exactly the pricing question you just mentioned. 2 yuan. Everyone knows that Nongfu Spring sells for only 1.4 yuan here, right? My cola, even at this price, is about a 30% discount. So people immediately wondered, if you do business like this, are you even making any money? Yeah, right. Actually, in this process, Lyncher is very busy, and across the whole chain, there's about a 30% gross margin. Out of that, 20 percentage points of gross margin are given to today's franchisees, and on our end, we only keep about 10 percentage points of gross margin. Not only did we not lose money, but with this 10% gross margin, we also have to handle procurement, organize the products, and take care of logistics and marketing, all of it. Later on, if you look at today's publicly available profit statements, we might still be able to make about 2 to 3% net profit margin. In the previous generation of China's supermarket and retail distribution chain, which some of you might not be too familiar with, actually back then when our products left the factory all the way to the supermarket, the price on these shelves would actually be marked up 2 to 3 times. But things were hectic at the time. I think back then, after Mr. Yen from Yenzhou pioneered this model, it became very clear. For these products, I would try to go directly to the source to purchase, and I'd pay you in cash right away. At this point, the value chain is directly shortened. I use cash to buy the goods, and I don't return any unsold items either. I don't charge any of those extra fees, so I think this is where his innovation in the business model has greatly improved efficiency and lowered costs. This is the pattern of retail evolution we learned at JD.com from Mr. Richard Liu. A wide selection of products, professionalism, low prices, and convenience. The more you can incorporate these excellent and successful elements, when all of these are brought together, we see a truly sharp, killer-level disruptor in the telecom industry today. It's a game changer for the industry, so Lyncher is extremely busy. This business model is the epitome of China's offline category franchise chains professional discounts, right? The user experience is really something. From our perspective, we really learned a lot from this, and Lyncher is indeed very busy. When this business model was first explored in Changsha, I remember you also communicated with Zhao Yiming and Zhao Ding about how, at that time, they operated in some of the more lower-tier markets in Jiangxi. What kind of situations have you seen in terms of organization? And in the past few years, in these slightly lower-tier markets, from Tier 1.1 to Tier 2, you might have noticed that our Guoquan has also entered, and today our Xinjiai has also entered. At this level, what kinds of changes have you observed?
Yeah, right. Let me add something we've learned. It's actually about happiness, the happiness that retail brings to people. Sometimes, aside from the fact that people might think the product prices are very competitive, it's also about that feeling you get when you can walk away with a plastic bag full of goods for just 30 yuan. That sense of surprise and the joy it brings, plus when you walk into the store and see how bright and clean it is, and you see the staff bustling around like Jay Cho, and then they actually got Jay Cho to be their spokesperson, this kind of happiness. They even organize music festivals and all sorts of events. It really adds a lot of public, joyful experiences for users beyond just the products themselves. This is something we've learned from Mingming Henmang. This is something I've learned as well, and it's also what Yenzhou, as a founder coming from a different field and not a traditional retail background, has brought to me. I feel like the industry is seeing a lot of new trends and unique elements because of this. And also, it's true that the local environment shapes the people. I think the characteristics of a region can really give rise to a certain kind of business trait or even a kind of transformation. For example, Mingming Henmang is in Changsha, where the competition is extremely fierce. In places where rent and labor costs are relatively high, the types of businesses that emerge are different from those that come from more down-to-earth places like Jiangxi.
Yichuan.
Yes, Yichuan in Jiangxi, the telecom businesses that come out of there. It really does have a different environment. In a market like this, as a founder, Zhao Ding is also very impressive. He combined the unique characteristics of his market and opened bigger stores, ones that are even more prominent. We call them standing tall and firm in the city. The brightest, most eye-catching store. The advantage of this is that I can attract people from farther away, and for consumers living in a place like Yichuan, their pace of life might not be so fast, so they're relatively less sensitive to distance. So, this store will be even more popular, so that's why. Dingchuang has innovated. On top of being very busy in the city, they further upgraded to an even larger store for the lower tier markets. This kind of store has truly become. When the snack retail format was rapidly developing and entering its second phase of expansion into lower tier markets, this kind of transformation became extremely important and was gradually adopted by the entire industry. So what this teaches us is that, for different levels of the market, you really do need to further innovate and upgrade your stores.
This is also what we see when these chains are on their journey toward 10,000 stores. There are two approaches. In higher tier cities, they expand everywhere, blanketing the market. In these densely populated, high-consumption cities, you can open enough stores to really saturate the area. For example, take a city like Changsha. Our Xinjiang alone has 800 stores there, right? That's basically one store for every 10,000 people, maybe a bit more than 10,000. Lincher is also very busy, and in Changsha, they might have opened 600 or 700 stores as well. So, in higher tier cities, we really can expand everywhere and cover the whole market. Then there's another aspect. We move into lower tier cities, especially prefecture level cities, as well as county level and township level areas. And we're able to open these really prominent standalone stores there, the kind that really stand out. The most typical scenario is that right on the main street of a county town, we now have the biggest and brightest storefront sign. Usually these prime spots are really busy, maybe at a street corner, and the most beautiful store there belongs to us. So, in the end, the tens of thousands of stores we see across China today, in a sense, are really the result of our efforts in lower tier markets. That's what supports it. I remember in Guoquan's prospectus, and even in Mingming Henmang's prospectus, this number was also discussed. For us, probably starting from third-tier cities and below, the stores we expanded in those regions might account for more than half of our total number of stores. It's close to 2/3. So today, whether we're talking about Mixue Bingqing shareholders or these other retail formats, the essence is that we've really brought the chain business model deep into China's lower-tier cities. This is actually the real opportunity and secret to their development. So it's not just that in recent years, when people talk about China's online market, they say Pinduoduo opened up the lower tier markets outside the Fifth Ring Road, reaching 500 million people. What they did online, in fact, is just like what we've done in recent years with these 10,000 store chains. It's like laying down another pipeline, opening these stores not just to 500 million people, but maybe to an extra 600 or 800 million, maybe even reaching 1 billion people. They've opened right at people's doorsteps, right at the entrance of every neighborhood. So today, as we talked about earlier, about setting out on a journey, back in 2016 and 2017, when we talked about continuing to do retail, it was all about innovation online. Or was it offline innovation? Maybe it was just a twist of fate at that moment, by some happy accident, that we made our choice. We decided to go with physical stores. And we didn't jump on that wave, the one where today people are investing hundreds of billions to transform online retail. So I think this choice ended up giving us a lot of opportunities, a lot of insights. So with the theme of community-based chain stores, if you look ahead, what ongoing opportunities do you think we still have in this area? Or what else might we do here? How do you see this? I think consumers, when it comes to beauty,
The pursuit of a better life by consumers is truly endless. We spend most of our lives either at home or at our workplaces, and actually, both of these are part of the community. In these two settings, we want to eat better, drink better, and experience better services. I believe that within this, whether it's in our food, our beverages, or our dining, there are still plenty of opportunities for niche categories. So we're still working hard to find them here. From the perspective of consumer demand, we look to meet those needs by finding more great products, great combinations, great business models, and outstanding entrepreneurs, so we can continuously discover more chains with the potential to reach 10,000 stores.
There are still so many categories like baked goods and prepared foods, right? By combining different categories, you can create various retail formats. And within each category, we actually try to find ways to connect with the upstream suppliers. We develop even better products. Among China's 10,000 store chains, many categories are worth exploring, waiting for the right opportunity. Of course, something we've discussed recently is that many of our categories have already reached the 10,000 store mark. We've reached tens of billions, but what comes next? Today, we've gone public and Guoquan has hit 10,000 stores. Maybe now, at most, you can open 20,000 stores, but then what? Does the company stop growing? So lately, we've started to deeply study what happens after reaching 10,000 stores. Especially as we turn our attention to this, we've spent a lot of time learning from Japan. Even today, the number of stores might not necessarily keep increasing. But now, I can totally focus on creating better product category combinations for each store, iterating and upgrading more products, and adjusting the supply chain. At this point, I might be able to attract even more customers. In other words, we believe that the next stage of growth for these 10,000 store chains will depend on the performance of each individual store. The growth of individual stores will ultimately drive sales to rise even further. And when it comes to single store growth, it's not just about what you can do right now, but more about putting yourself in the consumer's shoes. Think about how you can better meet their needs through your products. Also, we need to keep digging deeper into the supply chain. After being able to sell so many things and achieving tens of billions in sales, how do I make sure my contribution stands out in the process? Especially when it comes to moving from simply sourcing products to getting more involved in product development and ultimately being able to create products with higher added value. The more I do in this process, the more money I can make myself. After these chain stores expand locations, growth will come from same-store sales and improvements in the supply chain, which will ultimately lead to a long-term increase in our profit margins. That's why we're seeing these retail companies shift from focusing on speed. Growing bigger, stronger, and more enduring is an essential process. This is also a mindset we've been learning recently. We may have already spent much time today sharing the journey this restaurant has taken. What do you think? If we continue this series, should we keep going? Especially since we went to a place in Japan, what can we share next? Can you give a preview?
I think next time we can talk about what experiences and insights Japan has brought us and how we put these things into practice in China.
Learning these things in Japan gave us what we use in our restaurant chain, but also fundamental principles we discovered in Japanese retail chains. Why did 7-Eleven win? Why are these discount stores winning? This echoes major adjustments in China's supermarket systems. It's a hot topic, how to use Peng Donglai's approach to transform China's retail industry nationwide. This is where we started to study seriously. Sam's Club does a great job with products, and I believe this will become a series for us in retail, as ever since we started our business in 2016, we've been learning from this. We've poured a lot of time into this, and we've done a huge amount of learning along the way. We're just turning it into a series, gradually picking out themes to share with everyone. Today, it's already started. It's been a long time, so we'll try to make this into a series of programs to share even more with everyone. Thank you all, thank you.